Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Chloe, and today we're diving into a really critical topic. I'm joined by Alex, a researcher specializing in public policy and environmental communication. Alex, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, Chloe. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss something so vital to our collective future.
Our episode today is titled When Doubt Delays Policy's Climate Consequence. We're going to explore the profound repercussions of climate change denial on public perception and policymaking. Alex, when we talk about climate change denial, it's not just a simple disagreement, is it? There are often organized campaigns at play.
That's absolutely right, Chloe. It's far more complex than individual skepticism. We've seen decades of well-funded, organized efforts, often by specific industries and political groups, designed to sow doubt and undermine scientific consensus. This isn't accidental. It's a deliberate strategy.
That's a really important distinction, Alex. So, if it's a deliberate strategy, what are the primary drivers behind these organized efforts to deny climate change?
Well, Chloe, it often boils down to political, ideological, and significant economic interests. We're talking about powerful entities, particularly within the fossil fuel industry, who see climate action as a direct threat to their business models and profits.
So, it's not just about a difference of opinion, but a calculated defense of existing power structures and financial gains. What specific tactics do these groups employ to achieve their goals?
Precisely. Their tactics are quite varied. They'll often dispute or downplay scientific evidence, claim that any observed climate changes are entirely natural, or even exaggerate the potential negative consequences of climate action to deter policymakers.
It sounds like a multi-pronged approach. You mentioned the fossil fuel industry. Can you elaborate on how influential lobbying groups and political entities promote these narratives?
Certainly, we've seen well-orchestrated campaigns by the fossil fuel industry and conservative think tanks. They actively fund and disseminate denialist narratives, often through media and political channels. It's a strategy quite similar to what the tobacco industry used decades ago to downplay health risks.
That comparison to the tobacco industry is chilling, suggesting a deliberate attempt to mislead the public. Are there any key figures or organizations that stand out in these efforts?
Absolutely. Organizations like the Heartland Institute, often funded by figures such as the Koch brothers, have been instrumental in funding and spreading these narratives. In fact, over 90% of skeptical literature on climate change originates from right-wing think tanks.
That statistic is quite telling. Beyond the organized campaigns, what about the psychological and social dimensions that contribute to individuals accepting or even promoting climate change denial?
That's a crucial aspect. Cognitive and emotional barriers play a big role. People's ideological worldviews, their distrust of experts, or even just a general sense of powerlessness can contribute. There's also what we call soft denial.
Soft denial? That's an interesting term. What exactly does that entail?
Soft denial is when individuals accept the scientific consensus on climate change but then fail to act. This often stems from feelings of powerlessness, fear, or simply not knowing what effective action looks like. It's a disconnect between knowledge and behavior.
So it's not an outright rejection of the science, but a paralysis in response to it. How do social identity and political affiliation influence this disconnect?
They're incredibly powerful. Our social identity and political affiliation often dictate which information we trust and how we interpret it. If your social group or political party downplays climate change, it becomes much harder to accept the science and act on it, even if you intellectually understand the threat.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's delve a bit deeper into the specific tactics used to create doubt. What are some of the most common ones we see?
Three common tactics stand out. First, conspiracy theories, suggesting scientists manipulate data for financial gain. Second, cherry-picking data, where isolated studies are used to cast doubt on the overwhelming scientific consensus. And third, manufactured uncertainty.
Manufactured uncertainty. That phrase itself sounds quite deliberate. Can you explain what that involves?
It's a tactic where proponents of denial argue that any existing scientific uncertainty, no matter how small, invalidates the need for action. They amplify minor disagreements or unknowns to suggest that the entire scientific premise is flawed, thereby delaying or preventing policy responses.
It's a powerful way to sow doubt, even when the core science is robust. What's the ultimate impact of all these denial mechanics on public opinion and policy?
The impact is profound. Denialism shapes public perception, significantly decreasing belief in climate science. This exposure to denial narratives reduces individuals' intentions to engage in climate-positive behaviors, which then has a ripple effect.
And that ripple effect, I imagine, directly translates into legislative inertia.
Exactly. It results in legislative inertia, hindering effective climate change combat efforts. When public belief is eroded, the political will to enact meaningful policy diminishes, creating a dangerous cycle of inaction.
That cycle of inaction you mentioned, Alex, is truly concerning. It brings us back to the core question of who benefits from this doubt and delay. We've touched on the fossil fuel industry, but can you elaborate on the specific mechanisms through which these powerful interests exert their influence?
Certainly, Chloe. Beyond direct lobbying, these groups often operate through a network of conservative think tanks and advocacy organizations. They fund research, publish reports, and create media campaigns that actively promote narratives questioning climate science or exaggerating the costs of climate action. It's a very deliberate, well-resourced effort to shape public discourse.
So it's not just about influencing politicians directly, but also about shaping the information landscape itself. How does this funding and influence impact the perceived scientific debate, especially when the scientific consensus is so strong?
Precisely. Their strategy is to create a false sense of scientific debate where none truly exists. By funding a small number of contrarian voices and amplifying their messages, they can make it appear as though there's significant disagreement within the scientific community. This manufactured controversy then serves as a justification for delaying policy.
That's a powerful point. You mentioned earlier that over 90% of skeptical literature on climate change is linked to right-wing think tanks. What does that statistic tell us about the motivations behind these efforts?
It's incredibly telling, Chloe. It strongly indicates that the primary drivers are political and economic, rather than genuine scientific inquiry. The goal isn't to advance science, but to protect specific ideological positions and, crucially, the financial interests of industries that stand to lose from climate regulation.
That makes a lot of sense. And this strategy of creating doubt for economic gain, it has historical parallels, doesn't it? I recall you mentioning the tobacco industry.
Absolutely. The playbook is remarkably similar. Just as the tobacco industry funded its own scientists and think tanks to cast doubt on the link between smoking and cancer, the fossil fuel industry has adopted a very similar approach. They both sought to emphasize uncertainty, attack the credibility of mainstream science, and delay regulatory action for decades.
That comparison is quite stark. It suggests a deliberate, long-term strategy to mislead the public and policymakers. What are the long-term consequences of these tactics on public trust, not just in climate science, but in institutions more broadly?
The consequences are profound and far-reaching. It erodes public trust in scientific institutions, in government, and even in the media. When people are constantly exposed to conflicting narratives, it becomes harder to discern truth from misinformation, leading to a general cynicism that hinders effective collective action on any complex issue, not just climate change.
So, in essence, these politically and economically driven campaigns don't just delay climate action, they undermine the very foundations of informed public discourse and trust. It's a much larger societal challenge than just a scientific disagreement.
Exactly. It transforms a scientific issue into a cultural and political battleground, making it incredibly difficult to foster the kind of consensus needed for robust policymaking. Understanding these underlying influences is crucial if we hope to move forward.
That's a powerful summary, Alex. It really highlights the systemic nature of the problem. But I want to shift our focus now to the individual level. Beyond the organized campaigns, what are the psychological and social factors that make people susceptible to denial or even lead them to inaction even when they understand the science?
That's a crucial distinction, Chloe. At the individual level, we see a lot of cognitive and emotional barriers at play. People's existing ideological worldviews, for instance, or a general distrust of experts can significantly shape how they perceive climate information.
So it's not just about the facts themselves, but how those facts align with a person's pre-existing beliefs and their trust in the messenger. How do these ideological worldviews specifically filter the information people receive?
Exactly. Our worldviews act like a lens. If climate action is perceived as a threat to one's economic freedom or a particular way of life, people are more likely to dismiss or reinterpret scientific evidence that supports it. It's a form of motivated reasoning, where we seek out information that confirms what we already believe.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned something earlier called soft denial. Can you elaborate on what that means in this context?
Soft denial is fascinating because it's not an outright rejection of the science. These are individuals who generally accept the scientific consensus on climate change but then fail to act. This often stems from feelings of powerlessness, fear, or simply not knowing what effective action looks like. It's a disconnect between knowledge and behavior.
So it's a kind of paralysis, even when the intellectual understanding is there. What contributes to that feeling of powerlessness, do you think?
The sheer scale of the problem can be overwhelming. When people feel that their individual actions are insignificant in the face of a global crisis, or that the solutions are too complex and costly, it can lead to a sense of futility. This emotional response can then prevent them from engaging, even if they're concerned.
And how do social identity and political affiliation play into this disconnect between knowing and acting? It seems like those are incredibly powerful forces.
They are indeed. Our social identity and political affiliation heavily influence which information we trust and how we interpret it. If your social group or political party downplays climate change or frames climate action as a partisan issue, it becomes much harder to accept the science and act on it, even if you intellectually understand the threat.
So it's almost like a form of social conformity, where aligning with your group's stance takes precedence over objective scientific understanding.
Precisely. It's a powerful form of social influence. People are social creatures, and the desire to belong and conform to group norms can override individual rational assessment, especially on issues that have become highly politicized.
And how does this manifest in terms of, say, media consumption or daily conversations? Do people actively seek out information that reinforces their group's view?
Absolutely. We see the creation of echo chambers, where individuals primarily consume media and interact with people who share their existing viewpoints. This selective exposure to information further solidifies their beliefs and makes it even harder for alternative perspectives to penetrate.
It sounds like a self-reinforcing cycle. What about the role of fear in all of this? Is fear always a motivator for action, or can it also contribute to denial?
That's a great question. While fear can certainly motivate, it can also be paralyzing. If the threat feels too immense, too immediate, or too uncontrollable, individuals might resort to denial as a coping mechanism. It's a way to manage the anxiety by simply pushing the uncomfortable reality away.
So it's not just about rejecting facts, but also about emotional responses to overwhelming information, leading to a kind of psychological retreat.
Exactly. It's a complex interplay of cognition and emotion, where our brains are trying to protect us from perceived threats, sometimes by distorting reality or simply disengaging from it.
Given these deep-seated psychological and social dimensions, are there effective ways to bridge this gap, to move people from soft denial to action, or to help them overcome these cognitive barriers?
It's challenging, but not impossible. Strategies that focus on local impacts, community-based solutions, and empowering narratives tend to be more effective than simply presenting more scientific data. Connecting climate action to personal values like health or economic opportunity can also resonate more deeply.
That sounds like a more hopeful and human-centered approach, focusing on what people care about directly rather than abstract global threats.
Precisely. It's about making the problem feel manageable, relatable, and connecting it to tangible benefits within their own lives and communities. That's where we start to see shifts in behavior and engagement.
That dangerous cycle of inaction you describe, Alex, sounds like a critical bottleneck. Can you give us a clearer picture of how this legislative inertia actually plays out? What kinds of policies are most affected, or what does this delay look like in practice?
Well, Chloe, it often means that comprehensive climate legislation, things like carbon pricing, renewable energy mandates, or stricter emission standards, either get stalled indefinitely in committees or significantly watered down before it can pass. Even smaller, more localized initiatives can face unexpected resistance.
So it's not just a lack of new policy, but also the weakening of existing or proposed measures. Are there specific sectors or areas where this legislative inertia has been particularly damaging?
Absolutely. The energy sector is a prime example where transitions to cleaner sources are slowed, but it also impacts infrastructure planning, agricultural practices, and even public health initiatives that could mitigate climate impacts. The delay compounds the problem, making future solutions more expensive and difficult.
That makes sense. And beyond the direct policy impacts, how does this erosion of public belief, fueled by denialism, affect the implementation of policies that do manage to pass?
That's a crucial point. Even if a policy passes, if public belief in climate science is low, there can be significant resistance to its implementation. Compliance may be poor, or public support for enforcement mechanisms could wane, effectively undermining the policy's intended impact.
So it creates a situation where even well-intentioned policies struggle to gain traction or achieve their goals because the foundational public understanding and support aren't there.
Precisely. It's a constant uphill battle. Policymakers become hesitant to champion strong climate action if they perceive a lack of public mandate, or worse, fear political backlash from a misinformed electorate.
And what about the economic costs of this delay? We often hear about the cost of climate action, but what about the cost of inaction due to denial-driven policy delays?
The economic costs are immense and often underestimated. We're talking about increased disaster relief, higher insurance premiums, damage to infrastructure from extreme weather, and long-term impacts on agriculture and public health. These are tangible costs that accumulate year after year, far outweighing the investment needed for proactive climate solutions.
It sounds like a classic case of paying more later for not acting now. Does this legislative inertia also impact international climate efforts, or is it primarily a domestic issue?
It absolutely impacts international efforts. When major nations, particularly those with significant emissions, demonstrate legislative inertia domestically, it weakens their credibility and leverage in global negotiations. It can create a domino effect, making it harder to achieve ambitious international agreements.
So domestic policy paralysis can have global repercussions, hindering collective action on a worldwide scale.
Exactly. Climate change is a global problem requiring global solutions, and if key players are hobbled by internal denialism and policy delays, the entire international framework suffers.
It paints a rather bleak picture of how manufactured doubt can ripple through society, from individual perception to global policy. What then is the long-term societal cost of this erosion of trust in science and institutions beyond just climate policy?
The long-term cost is a weakening of democratic processes and informed decision-making across the board. If people are conditioned to distrust scientific consensus on one major issue, that skepticism can easily spread to other areas, making it harder to address any complex challenge that requires expert input and collective action.
That's a sobering thought. It suggests that the fight against climate change denial isn't just about the environment, but about the health of our public discourse itself.
It truly is. It's about the capacity of societies to respond effectively to evidence-based threats. Rebuilding that trust and fostering a culture of informed engagement is perhaps the most critical challenge we face.